The study of ancient Indian history is important for several reasons. It tells us how, when, and where people developed the earliest cultures in India, how they began undertaking agriculture and stock raising, which made life secure and settled. It shows how the ancient Indians discovered and utilized natural resources and how they created the means for their livelihood. We get an idea of how the Asian inhabitants made arrangements for food, shelter, and transport, and learn how they took to farming, spinning, weaving, and metalworking, and the like, how they cleared forests, founded villages, cities, and eventually large kingdoms. People are not considered civilized unless they know how to write. The different forms of writing prevalent in India today are all derived from the ancient script. This is also true of the languages that we speak today. The languages we use have roots in ancient times and have developed through the ages. The relevance of the past to the present. The study of India's past assumes a special significance in the context of the problems we currently face. Some people clamor for the restoration of Asian culture and civilization, and a substantial number are sentimentally swayed by what they consider to be the past glories of India. This is a different form of concern for the preservation of Asian heritage in art and architecture. What they really want to bring back is the old pattern of society and culture. This demands a clear and correct understanding of the past. There is no doubt that Indians of old made remarkable progress in a variety of fields, but these advances alone cannot enable us to compete with the achievements of modern science and technology. We cannot ignore the fact that Asian Indian society was marked by gross social injustice. The lower orders, particularly the Shudras and untouchables, were encumbered with disabilities which are shocking to the modern mind. Similarly, law and custom discriminate against women in favor of men. The restoration of the old way of life will naturally revive and strengthen all these inequalities. The success of the Asian in surmounting the difficulties presented by nature and human factors can build our hope and confidence in the future, but any attempt to bring back the past will mean a perpetuation of the social inequality or the affected India. All this makes it essential for us to understand what the past means. We have many survivors of Asian medieval and later times persisting in the present. The old norms, values, social customs, and the holistic practice are so deeply ingrained in the minds of the people that they cannot easily themselves get rid of them. Unfortunately, these survivals inhibit the development of the individual and the country, and were deliberately fostered in colonial times. India cannot develop rapidly unless such vestiges of the past are eradicated from its society. The caste system segregationism hinder the democratic integration and development of India. Caste barriers and prejudice do not allow even educated individuals to appreciate the dignity of manual labor and hamper our unification of our common cause. Though women have been enfranchised at their age-old social sovereignty prevents from playing their due role in society, and this is true too of the lower orders of society. Studying the Asian past helps us to deeply examine the roots of these prejudices and discover the causes that sustain the caste system, subordinate women, and promote narrow religious sectarianism. The study of Asian India history is therefore relevant not only to those who want to understand the true nature of the past, but also to those who seek to understand the nature of the obstacle that hamper India's progress as a nation. Material remains. The methods of archaeology help us to recover the material remains of the past relating to ancient, medieval, and modern periods of our history. In India and many other countries, archaeology is used to study prehistory and ancient history. Prehistory is concerned with the period of for which there are no written sources, and history is basically based on written material. Prehistoric cities differ from historical cities in several respects. Generally, they are not in the form of prominent habitation remains, but principally of fossils of human plants and animals. They are found on the hills, slopes of plateaus and mountains, and on the bank of nearby rivers with terraces and comprise sundry fauna and flora. More importantly, numerous stone tools from the Stone Age have been found at these sites. The remains of Tools, plants, animals, and humans from the pre-ice age indicate the climatic conditions that prevailed at the time. Although writing was known in India by the middle of the 3rd millennium BC in the Indus culture, it has not so far been disappeared. Thus, though the Harappans knew how to write, their culture is placed into the proto-historic phase. The same is the case with the Catholic or Copper Stone Age cultures, which had no writing. Decipherable writing was known in India only in the 3rd century BC, with the Ashokan inscription providing solid evidence for historical resource reconstruction from that time. However, despite the critical use of Vedic and post-Vedic literary sources for history in the pre-Ashokan times, archaeology remains a very important source of for historians. Ancient India's left innumerable material remains the stone temples in South India and the brick monasteries in Eastern India still stand to remind us of the great building activities of the past. However, the major parts of these remains lies buried in mounds scattered all over India. A mound is an elevated portion of land covering the remains of old habitations. It may be of different types: single culture, major culture, and multicultural. Single culture mounds represent only one culture throughout. Some mounds represent only the painted grave where PGW culture, others Satavana culture, and yet others that of the cushions in major culture mounds. One culture is dominant and the others are of secondary importance. Multicultural mounds represent several important cultures in succession which occasionally overlap with one another, as is the case with the Ramayana and Mahabharata. An executive amount can be used to understand successive layers of the material and the aspect of a culture. Amount can be excavated vertically or horizontally. Vertical excavation means lengthwise digging to uncover the period-wise sequence of culture. It is generally confined to a part of the site. Horizontal excavation entails digging the mound as a whole or a major part of it. The method may enable the excavator to obtain a complete idea of the site culture in a particular period. As most sites have been dug vertically, they provide a good chrono- chronological sequence of material culture. Horizontal diggings being very extensive are very few in numbers, with the result that the excavations do not give us a full or even accurate picture of material life in many phases of ancient Indian history. Even in those mounds which have been excavated, the Asian remains have been preserved in varying proportions in the dry, arid climate of western UP, Rajasthan, and northwestern India. Antiquities are found in a better state of preservation, but in the moist and humid climate of the mid Gangetic plains and in the Delatic legions, even iron implements suffered corrosion and mud structure become difficult to only the burnt kerosene and mud only the burnt bricks structure or stone structure of the Gangetic plains are well preserved. Excavations have brought to light the villages that people established around 6000 BC in Balochistan. They also tell us about the material culture which was developed in the Gangetic plains in the second millennium BC. They show the layout of the settlements in which people lived, the types of pottery they used, the form of house in which they dwell, the kind of grills they are, and the type of tools the implements they use. Some people in South India buried in graves along with the dead, their tools, weapons, pottery, and the other belongings, and these were encircled by large pieces of stone. These structures are called megalith, although some megaliths do not fall in this category. By digging them, we learn of the life people lived in the Deccan from the Iron Age onwards. The science that enables us to systematically dig the successive layers of old mounds and to form an idea of the material life of the people is called archaeology. Coins. Although a large number of coins and inscriptions have been found on the surface, many of them have been unhurted by digging. The study of coins is called numismatic. Ancient India currency was not issued in the form of paper as is the case nowadays but as metal coins. Ancient coins were made of metal, copper, silver, gold, and lead. Coin molds made of burnt clay have been discovered in large numbers. Most of them relate to the Kushan period, that is, the first three Christian centuries. The use of such molds in the post Gupta period virtually disappeared. As there was nothing like the modern banking system in ancient times, people stored money in earthenware and also in brass vessels and maintained them as precious hoards on which they co- could fall back in time of need. Many of these hoards containing not only Indian coins but also those minted abroad, such as in the Roman Empire, have been discovered in different parts of India. They are preserved mostly in museums in Kolkata. Indian coins in the Museum of Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. As Britain ruled over India for a long time, British officials succeeded in transferring many of the Indian coins to private and public collections in Britain. Coins of the major dynasties have been catalogued and published. We have catalogues of the coins in the Indian Museum at Kolkata of India, Indian coins in the British Museum in London, and so on. Nonetheless, there are a large number of coins that have yet to be catalogued and published. Our earliest coins contain a few symbols, but the later coins depict the figure of kings, divinities, and also mention their names and dates. The areas where they are found indicate the region of their circulation. This has enabled us to reconstruct the history of several ruling dynasties, especially of the Indo-Greeks who came to India from North Afghanistan and ruled here in the 2nd and 1st century BC. As coins were used for various purposes such as donation, a mode of payment, and a medium of exchange, they throw considerable light on economic history. Some coins were issued by guilds of merchants and goldsmiths with the permission of the rulers. This shows that crafts and commerce had become important. Coins help transaction on a large scale and contribute to trade. The largest number of Indian coins date to the post Maurya period. These were made of leads, Potin, copper, bronze, silver, and gold. The Guptas issued the largest number of gold coins. All this indicates that trade and commerce flourished, especially in post Maurya and a good part of the Gupta period. However, only a few coins belonging to the post Gupta period have been found, which indicates a decline of trade and commerce in that period. Coins also portray kings and gods and contain religious symbols and legends, all of which throw light on the art and religion of the time. Curies were also used as coins, though their purchasing power was low. They appear in substantial numbers in post Gupta times but may have been used earlier. Inscriptions for more important than coins are inscriptions. Their study is called Egigraphy, and the study of the old writing used in inscription and other old records is called paleography. Inscriptions were carved on seals, stone pillars, rocks, copper plates, temples, walls, wooden tablets, and bricks or images. In India as a whole, the earliest inscriptions were recorded on stone. However, in the early centuries of the Christian era, copper plate began to be used for this purpose. Even then, the practice of engraving inscription on stone continue on a large scale in South India. We have also in that region a large number of inscriptions recorded on the walls of temples to serve as permanent records. Like coins, inscriptions are preserved in various museums of the country, but the largest number may be found in the office of the chief hagiographists at Mysore. The earliest inscriptions were written in Prakrit in the 3rd century BC. Sanskrit was adopted as an hagiographic medium in the 2nd century AD, and its use became widespread in the 4th and 5th centuries, but even then Prakrit continued to be used. Inscriptions began to be composed in the Persian language in the 9th and the 10th century. Most inscriptions bearing on the history of the Maurya, post Maurya, and Gupta periods have been published in a series of collections called Corpus Inscriptionum Indicanum, but not many inscriptions of the post-Gupta. The history of the later Vedic period is based mainly on the Vedic texts which were compiled after the age of the Rig Veda. The collection of Vedic hymns or mantras are known as the Samhitas. The Rig Veda Samhita is the oldest Vedic text on the basis of which we have described the early Vedic age for the purpose of recitation or prayers of the king. The Rig Veda were said to tune, and this modified collection was known as the Samaveda in post Rig Vedic times. Two other collections, the Yajurveda Samhita and the Atharvaveda Samhita, were composed. The Yajurveda contains not only hymns but also rituals to accompany their recitation, the latter reflecting the social and political milieu of the time. The Atharvaveda contains charms and spells to ward off evils and disease in contents, throwing light on the beliefs and practice of the non-Aryans. The Vedic Samhitas were followed by the composition of a series of texts known as the Brahmas. These are replete with ritualistic formula and explain the social and religious meaning of rituals. All these later Vedic texts were compiled in the Upper Gangetic Basic in 1000 to 500 BC. During the same period and in the same area, digging and exploration have brought to light nearly 700 inhabited sites. These are called painted grave where PGW sites because they were inhabited by people who used earthen bowls and dishes made of painted grey pottery. They also used iron weapons with the combined evidence from the later Vedic text and PGW iron phase archaeology. We are able to form an idea of the life of the people in the first half of the first millennium BC in western UP and the adjoining areas of Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. The text shows that the Aryans expanded from Punjab over the whole of western UP covered by the Ganga Yamuna Doab. The Bharats and Puras, the two major tribes, combined and thus formed the Kuru people. Initially, they lived between the Saraswati and the Drisharvati just on the frying of the Doab. Soon the Kurus occupied Delhi and the upper reaches of the Doab, the area called Kurukshetra or the land of the Kurus. Gradually, they coalesced with a people called the Panchalas who occupied the central part of the Doab. The authority of the Kuru Panchala people spread over Delhi and the upper and central parts of the Doab. They set up their capital at Hastinapur, situated in Meerut district. The history of the Kuru tribes is important for the Battle of Bharat, which is the principal theme of the great epic called the Mahabharata. This war is supposed to have been fought around 950 BC between the Kuruvas and the Pandavas, since both of them belonged to the Kuru clan. As a result of war virtually the whole of the Kuru clan was wiped out. Excavations at Hastinapur, datable to the period 900 BC to 500 BC, have revealed settlements and faint beginnings of town life. They do not, however, reflect the description of Hastinapur in the Mahabharata because the epic was finally compiled much later in about the 4th century AD when material life had greatly advanced. In later Vedic times. People hardly knew the use of burnt bricks. The mud structures that have been discovered at Hastinapur could not be imposing and lasting from traditions. We learn that Hastinapur was flooded and the remnants of the Kuru clan moved to Kaushambi near Allahabad. The Panchala kingdom, which covered the modern district of Bareilly, Badaयूं, and Farrukhabad, is famous for its philosopher, king, and Brahman theologians mentioned in later Vedic texts. Towards the end of the later Vedic period, in around 500 BC, the Vedic people spread in large numbers from the Doab further east to Koshala in eastern UP and to Vidhya in north Bihar. Although Koshala is associated with the story of Rama, this story is not mentioned in Vedic literature. In with the story of Rama This story is not mentioned in Vedic literature. In eastern UP and North Bihar, the Vedic people had to contend against people who used copper implements and the black and red earthen pots. In western UP, the possible came up against the people who used pots of orange or red color together with copper implements. At a few places, they also came against the user of the late Harappan culture. Many Munda words occur in later Vedic texts, which were compiled in the Upper Gangetic Basin. The would suggest that the later Vedic people also encountered the Munda speaker in this area. However, the opponents of the later Vedic people were they evidently did not occupy any large and compact area, and their number in the upper Gangetic basin does not seem to have been large. The Vedic people succeed in the second phase of their expansion because they used iron weapons and horse-drawn chariots. Use of iron. The story of iron is similar to that of the horse. The demo domesticated horse is first noticed near the Black Sea in the 6th millennium BC, but it became common only from the 2nd millennium BC onwards. Similarly, iron underwent a long gestation. Lumps of stone or iron move in outer space. When they encounter the atmosphere, they hit the ground and plummet to earth as meteorites. Such a piece was found in ancient Egypt in 3000 BC. It was identified as iron and was called black copper from heaven in the Egyptian language. Many copper minerals contain iron ores. It took many years to separate iron ores from these minerals and form the pure iron metals. As a pure metal, iron was first made in Meso- Mesopotamia in 5000 BC and later in Anatolia in the 3rd millennium BC. However, UP to 1200 BC, iron was valued as a precious metal in Western Asia and used as present by rulers. In metal in the Indian subcontinent, iron is sometimes attributed to Lothal and to some site in Afghanistan in Japan times. Neither of these, however, represent pure iron metal nor working in iron. They are really copper objects containing iron ores. These ores have not been separated from copper and given a distinct and separate identity as a pure iron metal. In India, pure iron at some site in Rajasthan in the Copper Stone Age has been reported, and also in Karnataka. Towards the end of that phase, iron can thus be placed in the second half of the second millennium BC. In this phase, we have no idea about its continuing use in terms of time and place. Around 1000 BC, it was used in the Gandhara area in Pakistan. Iron implements viewed with dead bodies have been discovered in substantial numbers. They have also been found in Balochistan at about the same time. Iron was used in eastern Punjab, western UP, MP, and Rajasthan. Excavation shows that iron weapons such as arrowheads and spears came to be commonly used in western UP from about 800 BC onwards. With iron weapons, the Vedic people may have defeated the few adversaries that they may have faced in the upper portion of the dome. The iron axe may have been used to clear the forest in the upper Gangetic basin, although because rainfall ranked between 35 cm and 65 cm, these forests may not have been very dense. Towards the end of the Vedic period, knowledge of iron spread in eastern UP and Videha. The earliest iron implements discovered in this area relate to the 7th century BC, and the metal itself is called Shama or Krishna as black metal in the later Vedic text. Agriculture. Although very few agricultural tools made of iron have been found, undoubtedly agriculture was the chief means of subsistence of the later Vedic people. Late Vedic texts speak of 6, 8, 12, and even 24 oxen yoked to the plug. This may be an exaggeration. Plugging was done with a wooden plug shape which could function in the light soil of the upper Gangetic plains. Sufficient blocks could not have been available because of the cattle slaughter in sacrifice. Agriculture was therefore prevalent, but there is no doubt about its wide prevalence. The Sahapata Brahma speaks at length about the plugging rituals According to ancient legends, Janaka, the king of Videha and Sita's father, lent his hand to the plug in those days. Even king and princess did not hesitate to take to manual labor. Balarama Krishna brother was called Haldhara or wielder of the plug. Gautam Buddha is depicted plugging with oxen in a Bodh Gaya sculpture. Eventually, plugging was assigned to the lower orders and profitable for the upper varnas.
Of administration. In contrast to the Maurya rulers, the Gupta kings adopted pompous titles such as Parameshwar, Maharaja Dhiraj, and Parambhattarak, which signify that they ruled over many lesser kings in their empire. Kingship was hereditary, but royal power was limited by the want of a firm adherence to primogeniture. The throne did not always go to the eldest son, creating uncertainties of which the chiefs and high officials took advantage. The Guptas made munificent gifts to the Brahmins, who expressed their gratitude by comparing the king to different gods. He was looked upon as Vishnu, the protector and preserver. The goddess Lakshmi is invariably represented on Gupta coins as Vishnu's wife. The numerical strength of the Gupta army is not known. Evidently, the king maintained a standing army which was supplemented by the forces occasionally supplied by his feudatories. Horse chariots receded into the background and cavalry came to the fore. Horse archery became an important element in military tactics. During the Gupta period, land taxes increased in numbers and those on trade and commerce decreased. Probably the king collected taxes varying from one-fourth to one-sixth of the produce. In addition, whenever the royal army passed through the countryside, the local people had to feed it. The peasants had also to supply animals, food, grains, furniture, etc. for the maintenance of royal officers and on duty in rural areas. In central and western India, the villagers were also subjected to forced labor called vishti by the royal army and officials. The judicial system was far more developed under the Guptas than in earlier times. Several law books were compiled during this period and for the first time, civil and criminal laws were clearly demarcated. The theft and adultery under criminal law, disputes regarding various types of property under civil law, elaborate laws were laid down about inheritance. As in earlier times, many laws continued to be based on Varna differentiation. It was the duty of the king to uphold the law and try cases with the help of Brahman priests. The guilds of artisans, merchants, and others were governed by their own laws. Seals from Vishali and from Bhita near Allahabad indicate that these guilds flourished during Gupta times. The Guptas organized a system of provincial and local administration. The empire was divided into divisions called bhuktis, and each bhukti was placed under the charge of an aparika. The bhuktis were divided into districts which were placed under the charge of a Vishyapati. In eastern India, the Vishyas were divided into Vidhis, which again were subdivided into villages. The village headman gained in importance in Gupta times, managing village affairs with the assistance of elders. With the administration of a village or a small town, leading local elements were associated. No land transactions could be effected without their consent. In the urban administration, organized professional bodies were given a considerable say. The ceiling from Vaishali show that artisans, merchants, and the head of the guild served on the same corporate body, and in this capacity, the obviously conducted the affairs of the town. The administrative board of the district of Kodivarsha in North Bengal included the chief merchants, the chief trader, and the chief artisans. Their consent to land transaction was considered necessary. Artisans and bankers were organized into their own separate guilds. We have of numerous guilds of artisans, traders, etc. at Bhita, and Vishali, at Mandaso in Malwa, and at Indore. Silk weavers maintained their own guilds in the district of Bulandshahr in western UP. The oil pushers were organized into guilds. It seems that these guilds, especially those of merchants, enjoyed curtain immunities in any event. They looked after the affairs of their own members and punished those who violated the laws and customs of the guild. The system of administration described above applied only to North Bengal, Bihar, UP, and some adjoining areas of MP, which were ruled directly by the officers appointed by the Gupta kings. The major part of the empire was held by feudatory chiefs, many of whom had been subjugated by Samudragupta. The vassals who lived on the edge of the empire had three obligations to fulfill. As subordinate princes, they offered homage to the sovereign by personal attendance at his court, paid tribute to him, and presented to him daughters in marriage. It seems that in return they obtained character to rule their areas, and this marked with the royal Gauda seal seem to have been issued to the vassals. The Guptas thus controlled several tributary princes in MP and elsewhere. The second important feudal development that surfaced under the Guptas was the grand official and administrative concessions to priests and administrators started in the Deccan by the Sthavans, and practice became a regular affair in Gupta times. Particularly in MP, religious functionaries were granted land free of tax for posterity, and they were authorized to collect from the peasants all the tax that once went directly to the empire. The village content to the beneficiaries could not be entered by royal agents, retainers, and others, and the beneficiaries were also empowered to punish criminals. Whether state officials were paid by grants of land in Gupta times is not clear. The evidence of gold coins would suggest the higher officials continued to be paid in cash, but some of them may have been remunerated by land grants. As much of the imperial administration was managed by feudatories and beneficiaries, the Gupta rulers did not require as many officials as did the Mauryas, and also because, in contrast to the Maurya state, the Gupta state did not regulate economic activities on any substantial scale. The participation of leading artisans, merchants, elders, and others in the rural and urban administration also lessened the need to maintain a large retinue of officers. The Guptas neither needed nor had the elaborate administrative machinery of Maurya times, and in some ways their political system appears to have been feudal. Goals of life. Once the state and the Varna divided social order had been firmly established, the ancient thinkers advocated that a person should strive for the attainment of four goals. These were regulation of the social order or dharma, economic resources or earth, physical pleasures or karma, and salvation or moksha. Each of these objectives was expounded in writing matters ideas relating to economy were treated in the Arthashastra, the well-known book written by Dharmashastra and physical reason were discussed in the Kamsutra. All these three branches of knowledge were primarily concerned with the material world and its problems. They occasionally touched marginally on the questions of salvation. Salvation or moksha become the center subjects of the text on darshan of philosophy. It means deliverance from the cycle of birth and death, which was first recommended by Gautam Buddha but later emphasized by some Brahmanical philosophers. Crafts and technology. It would be wrong to think that Indians did not contribute to material culture. The first great contribution was made by the Harappa culture during the Bronze Age culture. It covered an area larger than that of Egypt of or of Mesopotamia. It produced the largest number of fired bricks and the best form of town planning. There is no doubt that crafts, commerce, and agriculture made great strides and supported numerous cities. In ancient times, Indians attained proficiency in several fields of production. Indian craftsmen developed great expertise in dyeing and creating various kind of colors. The basic colors made in India were so lustrous and lasting that the wonderful painting of Ajanta are still intact. Similarly, Indians developed great expertise in the art of making steel. This craft was first developed in India in 200 BC, and Indian steel was exported to many countries of the world from very early times and came to be called woods in later times. No other country in the world could match the steel swords made by Indian craftsmen, and these were in great demand in the entire region from Asia to Eastern Europe. The Arthashastra of Kautilya leaves no doubt that Indians could run the administration of a large empire and tackle the problems of a complex society. India produced a great ruler in Ashok who, in spite of his victory over Kalinga, adopted a policy of peace and non-aggression. Ashok and several other Indian and kings practiced religious tolerance and stressed that the wishes of the followers of other religions should be respected. Also, beside Greece, India was the only other country to experiment with some form of democracy. Science and mathematics. India made an important contribution to science in ancient times. Religion and science were inextricably linked. Astronomy made great strides in India because the planets began to be regarded as gods and their movements began to be closely observed. Their study became essential because of their connection to changes in the season and weather conditions, which were important for agriculture activities. The science of grammar and linguistics arose because the ancient Brahmins stressed that every Vedic prayers and mantras should be recited with meticulous precision. In fact, the first result of the scientific outlook of Indians was the development of Sanskrit grammar in the 5th century BC. Panini systematized the rules Sanskrit and produced a grammar called Ashtadhyayi. By the 3rd century BC, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine began to develop separately. In the field of mathematics, the ancient Indians made three distinct contributions: the notation system, the decimal system, and the use of zero. The earliest epigraphic evidence for the use of decimal system is in the beginning of the 5th century AD. The Indian national system was adopted by the Arabs, who spread it In the Western world, the Indian numerals are called Arabic in English, but the Arabs themselves called their numerals hints, and before they were adopted in the West, they had been used in India for centuries. They are to be found in the inscriptions of Ashok, which were inscribed in the 3rd century BC. Indians were the first to use the decimal system. Aryabhat was acquainted with it. The Chinese learned this system from the Buddhist missionaries, and the Western world borrowed it from the Arabs. When the latter came into contact with India, the zero was discovered by Indians in about the 2nd century BC. Indian mathematics considered in Arabian zero as a separate numeral, and it was used in the sense in sums of arithmetic in Arabia. In the earliest use of zero was in AD 873. The Arabs learned and adapted it from India and spread it in Europe. Although both Indians and Greeks contributed to algebra in Western Europe. Its knowledge was acquired not from Greece but from the Arabs, who had acquired it from India. The brick constructions of Harappa show that in northwestern India people had a substantial knowledge of measurement and geometry. Eventually, the Vedic people may have benefited from this knowledge, which appears in the Sulvasutras of about the 5th century BC. In the 2nd century BC, Apastamba produced a practical geometry for the construction of altars at which the kings could offer sacrifices. It described the acute angle, obtuse angle, and right angle. Aryabhat formulated the method for calculating the area of a triangle, which led to the origin of trigonometry. The most famous work of this time is Surya Siddhant, and no comparable work is to be found in the contemporary ancient East. Ancient Indians also made some contribution to the study of geography. They had little knowledge of the geography of the lands outside India, but the rivers, mountain ranges, places of pilgrimage, and different regions of the country are described in the epics and Purans. Although Indians were acquainted with China and Western countries, they neither had any clear idea of their location nor of their distances from India. In early times, Indians obtained some knowledge of navigation and contributed to the craft of shipbuilding. However, as the important political power had their seats of power far away from the coast and faced no threat from the sea, the ancient Indian princes did not pay any particular attention to navigation. There are no written texts for the study of society in pre-Vedic times. Archaeology tells us that people lived in small groups in the hilly areas. In the, in the Paleolithic age, their principal source of substance was the game they hunted and the wild fruits and roots they collected. Men learned to produce food and live in houses toward the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the use of the metal. The Neolithic and Chalcolithic communities lived on the uplands and the proximity of hills and rivers. Gradually, peasant villages were established in the Indus Basin area, and eventually they blossomed into the urban society of Harappa with large and small houses. However, once the Harappa civilization disappeared, urbanism did not reappear in Indian subcontinent for about 1500 years. For the history of society from the time of the Rig Veda onwards, we can use written texts. They tell us that the Rig Vedic society, despite its mastery of agriculture, was primarily pastoral. People were semi-nomadic, and their principal possessions were cattle and horses. The terms for cow, bull, and horse frequently figure in the Rig Veda. Cattle were considered to be synonyms with wealth, and wealthy person was called Gomat. Gomat was were found over cattle, and therefore the Raja, whose principal responsibility was to protect the cows, was called Gopa or Gopati. The cow was so central to the subsistence of the family that the daughter was called Duhitra, that is one who makes. So intimate was the acquaintance of the Vedic people with kind that when they encountered the buffalo in India, they called in Govala or cowhead. In contrast to references to cows and bulls, those to agriculture are fewer and occur in the late hymns of the Rig Veda. Cattle rearing Cattle rearing was the principal source of livelihood.
Colonialists grew and their contribution, although educated Indians retained their traditional history in the form of handwritten epics, Puranas, and semi biographical works. Modern research in the history of ancient India began only in the second half of the 18th century to serve the needs of the British colonial administration when Bengal and Bihar fell under the rule of the East India Company in 1765. They found it difficult to administer the Hindu law of inheritance. Therefore, in 1776, the Manu Smriti, the law book of Manu, which was considered authoritative, was translated into English as a code of Gentoo laws. Pandits were associated with British judges to administer Hindu civil law and Maulvis to administer that of Muslims. The initial efforts to understand ancient laws and customs, which continued largely until the 18th century, culminated in the establishment in Calcutta in 1784 of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. It was set up by a civil servant of the East India Company, Sir William Jones, 1746-94. He was the first to suggest that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek Bengal belong to the same family of languages. He also translated the play known as the Abhijanam Shakuntalam into English in 1780. The Bhagavad Gita, the most popular Hindu religious text, was translated into English by Wilkins in 1785. The Bombay Asiatic Society was set up in 1804, and the Asiatic Society of Great Britain was set up in London in 1823. William Jones emphasized that originally the European languages were very similar to Sanskrit and the Iranian language. This enthusiastic European countries such as Germany, France, and Russia to foster Indological studies. During the first half of the 19th century, chairs in Sanskrit were established in the UK and several other European countries. The greatest impetus to Indological studies was given by the German-born scholar F. Max Muller, 1823-1902, was largely based in England. The revolt of 1857 caused Britain to realize that it badly needed a deeper knowledge of the manners and social system of an alien people over whom it ruled. Similarly, the Christian missionaries sought to uncover the vulnerabilities in the Hindu religion to win converts. The strengthened the British Empire to meet these needs. Ancient scriptures were translated on a massive scale under the editorship of Max Muller. Altogether, 50 volumes, some in several parts, were published under the Sacred Books of the East series. Although a few Chinese and Iranian texts were included, Asian Indian texts were predominant. In the introduction to these volumes and the books based on them, Max Muller and other Western scholars made certain generalization about the nature of Asian Indian history and society. They state that the Asian Indians lacked a sense of history, especially of the element of time and chronologically. They added that Indians were accustomed to despotic rule, and also natives were so engrossed in the problem of spiritualism or of the next world that they felt no concern about the problems of this world. The Western scholars stressed that Indians had experienced neither a sense of nationhood or nor any form of self government. Many of these generalizations were made in the early history of India by Vincent Arthur Smith (1843–1920), who wrote in 1904 the first systematic history of Asian India. His book, which was based on in-depth study of the available sources, gave primacy to political history. It served as a textbook for nearly 15 years and is still used by scholars. Smith approach to history was pro-imperialist. As a loyal member of the Indian civil service, he emphasized the role of foreigners in Asian India. Alexander's invasion accounted for almost one third of his book. India was presented as a land of despotism which had not experienced political unity until the establishment of British rule. He observed autocracy is substantially the only form of government with which the historian of India is concerned. In some British interpretations of India in history serve to denigrate the Indian character and achievements and justify colonial rule. A few of these observations appear to have some validity. Thus, in comparison to the Chinese, Indians did not show any strong sense of chronologically, although in the earlier stage important events were dated with references to the death of Gautam Buddha. However, generalizations made by colonialistic historians were by and large either false or grossly exaggerated, but served as good propaganda material for the perpetuation of the despotic British rule. Their emphasis on the Indian tradition of one man rule could justify the system which vested all powers in the hands of the Viceroy. Similarly, if Indians were obsessed with the problems of the next world, the British colonial master had no option or no to look after their life in this world without any experience of self-rule in the past. How could the natives manage their affairs in the present? At the heart of all such generalization lay the need to demonstrate that Indians were incapable of governing themselves. Nationalist approach and its contribution. All this naturally came as a great challenge to Indian scholars, particularly to those who had received Western education. They were upset by the colonialistic distortion of their past history and at the same time distressed by the contrast between the decaying feudal society of India and the progressive capitalist society of Britain. A band of scholars took upon themselves not only the mission to reform Indian society but also to reconstruct Asian Indian history in such a way as to make a case for social reforms and, more importantly, for self government. In doing so, most historians were guided by the nationalist ideas of Hindu liberalism, but there was no dearth of scholars who adopt a rationalist and objective approach. To the second category belongs Rajendra Lal Mitra (1822–91), who published some Vedic texts and wrote a book entitled Into Aryans, a great lover of ancient heritage. He took a rational view of ancient society and produced a forceful tract to show that in ancient times people ate beef. Others south to prove that in spite of its peculiarities, the caste system was not basically different from the class system based on division of labor found in Europe's pre-industrial and Asian societies. In Maharashtra, Ramakrishna Gopal Bandakar 1837-1925 and Vishwanath Kashinath Rajwade 1869-1926 emerged as two great dedicated scholars who pieced together varied sources to reconstruct the social and political history of India. R.G. Bandakar reconstructed the political history of the Satavahans of the Deccan and the history of Vaishnavism and other sects, a great social reform through his researches. He advocated widow remarriage and castigated the evils of the caste system and child marriage with his unadulterated passion for such weak Rajwade journeyed from village to village in Maharashtra in search of Sanskrit manuscript and sources of Maratha history. The sources were eventually published in 22 volumes. He did not write much, but the history of the institution of marriage that he wrote in Marathi in 1926 will continue to be a classic because of its solid base in Vedic and other texts, and also because of the author's insight into the stages in the evolution of marriage in India. Pandurang Vaman Kane 1880-1972, a great Sanskritist wedded to social reform, continued the earlier tradition of scholarship. His monumental work entitled The History of the Dharmashastra, published in 5 volumes in the 20th century, is an encyclopedia of Asian society, social laws and customs that enable us to study the social process in ancient India. The Indian scholars diligently studies polity and political history to demonstrate that India did have a political history and that the Indians possess expertise in administration. Here, due credit should be given to Devdatta Ramakrishna Bandakar 1875-1950 and epigraphist who published books on Ashoka and on ancient Indian political institution. More valuable work was done by Himachandra Raychaudhuri 1890-1957, who reconstructed the history of ancient India from the time of the Mahabharata was that at 10th century BC to the end of the Gupta Empire. As a teacher of European history, he adopted some of the methods and comparative insight in writing this book. Although he did not comparative discuss the problem of periodization. His history of ancient India stopped with the 6th century AD, though he recognized the contribution of V.A. Smith to the reconstruction of early India history. Viet Rai Chaudhary criticized the British scholar at many points. His writings were marked by incapable scholarship but show a streak of militant Brahmins when he criticized Ashoka's policy of peace. A stronger element of Hindu realism appears in the writing of R.C. Majumdar, who was a prolific writer and the general editor of the multi-volume publication History and Culture of the Indian People. Art and literature. The ancient Indian masons and craftsmen produced wonderful works of art starting from Harappa times. In the historical period, the monolithic pillars erected by Ashoka are famous for their gloss and polish, which match the gloss on northern black polished ware. It is still a mystery how the craftsmen were able to achieve this kind of polish on pillars and pottery. The Maurya polished pillars were mounted on statues of animals, especially lions. The lion capital has been adopted as the national emblem of the Republic of India. We may also refer to cave temples of Ajanta as well as the famous Ajanta paintings, which go back to the beginning of the Christian era. In a way, Ajanta is the birthplace of Asian art and has many as 30 cave temples constructed between the 2nd century BC and the 7th century AD. The paintings started in the 2nd century AD and most of them relate to the Gupta period. Their themes were borrowed from stories about previous incarnations of the Buddha and from other Asian literature. The achievement of the Indian painters of Ajanta has been justly and greatly lauded by all art connoisseurs. The lines and colors used as Ajanta display a proficiency that was unmatched in the world until the Renaissance in Europe. Indian art, moreover, was not limited to India but spread to Central Asia and China at one end and to Southeast Asia on the other. The focal point of the spread of India art into Afghanistan and the neighboring parts of Central Asia was Gandhar. Elements of Indian art were fused with those of Central Asian and Hellenistic art, giving rise to a new art style called Gandhara style. The first statue of Buddha was fashioned in this style, although its features are Indian. The size and the presentation of the head and the drapery show Greek influence. Similarly, the temples constructed in South Indian served in some ways as models or the construction of temples in Southeast Asia. We may recall the temple at Angkor Wat in Cambodia and the temple at Borobudur in Java. In the field of education, writing was first undertaken in the mid 3rd millennium BC in the Harappa culture, though this script has not so far been disappeared in historical times. We find provision for higher education in the huge monastic establishment of Nalanda, which attracted students not only from different parts of India but also from Tibet and China. The standards of examination were stiff, and only those who could pass the pass the test prescribed by the Dawar Pandita or the scholar at the gate could be admitted to the university. Nalanda is one of the earliest examples of a residential cum teaching institution which housed thousands of monks devoted to learning, philosophy, and meditation. In the field of literature, the Indian produced the Rig Veda, which is the earliest a specimen of the Indo-Aryan language and literature, and on its basis an attempt has been made to determine the nature of the Aryan culture. In Gupta times, Kalidas wrote his fine works, and his play Abhishakuntalam has been translated into all the important languages of the world. Strength and weakness. It is difficult to sum up the achievements of ancient India, those of the Harappa culture and staggering the and Harappa objects are displayed in the Museum of India and Pakistan, though the contemporary Mesopotamian antiquities were largely lost or destroyed in the second Gulf War. In post Harappa time, people contribute to various fields of science and civilization. However, the caste system based on the Brahminical ideology persists to this day. In ancient times, the Shudras, including the untouchables, were convinced of their inborn inferiority, and this was the case too with women who were considered items of property. Even now, these dialects have not completely disappeared. Similarly, the common people continue to suffer from laws of land. Thus, Satavahans started the practice of land grants with administrative rights in the 2nd century. Later, rules would widely follow this practice, which caused unequal distribution of land and the impoverishment of the cultivators. The people were required to respect the rights of the landlords, and it was decreased that the opponents of land grants would be punished. Thus appear sharp inequalities in important fields. Although some Asian texts look upon the world as a finally, this idea would not make any impact. Contribution of Jainism. Jainism made the first serious attempt to mitigate the evils of the Varna order and the ritualistic Vedic religion. The early Jains discarded the Sanskrit language, principally patronized by the Brahmins. They adopted instead Prakrit, the language of the common people, to preach their doctrines. Their religious literature was written in Ardhamagadhi, and the texts were eventually compiled in the 6th century AD in Gujarat at a place called Vallabhi, a great center of education. The adoption of Prakrit by the Janas helped the growth of this language and its literature. Many regional languages developed out of Prakrit, particularly Shosina, from which the Marathi language developed. The Jainas composed the earliest important works in Apabhramsha hand compiled 8 words grammar. Jaina literature comprises epics, prose, novel, and drama. A large percentage of Jaina writing is still in the form of manuscripts that have yet to be published and which are to be found in the Jaina shrines of Gujarat and Rajasthan. In early medieval times, the Jainas also made substantial use of Sanskrit and wrote many texts in it. Last but not the least, they contribute to the growth of Kannada, in which they wrote initially like Buddhists. The Jainas were not image worshippers. Later, they began to worship Mahavira and also the 23 Tirthankars, beautiful and sometimes massive images in stone were sculpted for this purpose, especially in Karnataka, Gujarat, Rajasthan, and MP. Jaina art in ancient times is not as rich as its Buddhist counterpart, but Jainism contributed substantially to art and architecture in medieval times. Gautam Buddha and Buddhism. Gautam Buddha or Siddhartha was a contemporary of Mahavira. According to tradition, he was born in 567 BC in Shakya Kastarya family in Lumbini in Nepal near Kapilavastu, which is identified with Piprava in Basti district and is close to the foothills of Nepal. Gautam's father seems to have been the elected ruler of Kapilavastu and headed the Shakya Republican clan. His mother was a princess from the Koshalan dynasty. Thus, like Mahavira, Gautam too belonged to a noble family born in a republic. He also inherited some illegitimate beliefs. From early childhood, Gautam showed a meditative bent of mind. He was married early, but married life did not interest him. He was moved by the misery suffered by people in the world and sought a solution at the age of 29. Like Mahavira, he left home. He wandered from place to place for about 7 years and then attained enlightenment at the age of 35 at Bodh Gaya under a people tree. From this time onwards, he began to be called the Buddha or the Enlightened One. Gautam Buddha delivered the first sermon at Sanat in Banaras. He undertook long journeys and carried his message far and wide. He had a very strong physique and this enabled him to walk 20 to 30 kilometers a day. He kept wandering, preaching and meditating continually for 40 years, resting only during the annual rainy season. During this long period, he encountered many staunch supporters of rival sects, including the Brahmins, but defeated them in debates. His missionary activities did not discriminate between the rich and the poor, the high and the low, and men and women. Gautam Buddha passed away at the age of 80 in 1487 BC at a place called Kusinagara, continues with a village called Kasi and Dioria district in eastern UP. However, as in the case of Vardhama Mahavira, is the existence of Gautam Buddha in the 6th century BC is not supported by archaeological evidence. The cities Kaushambi, Shravasti, Varanasi, Vishali, and Rajgira, which the Buddha visited, did not assume any urban character until the 5th century BC.